Hi, today we're going to be talking about setting up a GMP cannabis or hemp analytical testing lab. I'm your presenter today, Lucas McCann from CannDelta. CannDelta is a regulatory and scientific consulting firm with focuses in both the cannabis and psychedelic space. We assist with licensing, compliance, and operations support across North America. A little bit of background about myself. I am the CSO and co-founder of CannDelta, which is a regulatory and scientific consulting firm. I was formerly with Health Canada as a chemist in the inspectorate of the health products branch and the regulatory operations and enforcement branch. I hold a PhD in synthetic organic chemistry. I studied synthesis of natural compounds related to controlled substances and did a lot of work on methodology as well. I specialize in science, lab analysis, setup, certifications, and compliance. I do a lot of the science and regulatory work at the office. So to start off with some disclaimers, these are some potentially forward-looking statements and should not be taken as any kind of investment or legal advice. And I have not received any financial compensation for my presentation today. Very quickly about us, we pride ourselves in our extensive regulatory and scientific backgrounds with consultants that have come from government and cannabis, regulatory, food, pharma, as well as the legal industry, specifically in quality departments as well. Some of the services we offer include GMP services for SOP review, SOP prep, mock audits, facility inspections and preparations, quality management system review, and quality documents review as well. Let's jump in. Why start an analytical testing lab? Well, as in pharma, the quality control laboratory serves as one of the most important functions in cannabis and hemp production and control. It's important from starting material all the way to finished products that could even be downstream. And analytical testing is a required component for raw hemp and hemp products so that raw hemp doesn't test hot, that is over 0.3% THC, which would make it defined as cannabis, and hemp and cannabis products need to be safe for consumers. That includes making sure that levels for microbials, heavy metals, solvents, and pesticides are all in allowable limits. Product quality and consistency is ensured. That's why analytical testing needs to be used to make sure that those products, especially the ones used for medical purposes, are safe for human consumption. Now, looking at the market share for analytical testing for hemp and cannabis, we can see that from a cannabis perspective, the image of the US there on the left, we have a medical framework in already many states, and now a legal adult use cannabis framework in 19 states, with Rhode Island now just recently decriminalizing, and that the US cannabis retail sales estimates have only been climbing since 2015. In fact, they've showed they're projected to show an increase in the amount of sales, upwards of 5.2 billion there. So the analytical hemp testing market alone in the US is an estimated 40 million per year. So there's certainly a large portion of market share, and a lot of value can be attributed to moving into the analytical testing space, as well as a very quick return on the investment. So as someone that might be setting up an analytical testing facility, how do you prove to your clients that you are committed to quality? And that's what analytical testing really needs to show, is a commitment to quality. And there are certainly some certifications that are worth considering if you're looking to set up an analytical testing lab. First, ISO 9001. So it's an international standard that specifies requirements for a quality management system, or a QMS. It implements quality management principles for customer-focused leadership and process approach. It's really a customer-focused accreditation that can speak volumes about how you're set up internally. Something that is also very important is another ISO certification, 17025, the International Standard for Testing and Calibration. It's established with the aim of offering quality and improving the processes within laboratories. GLP, or Good Laboratory Practices, is a quality system that covers the organization, processes, and conditions under which non-clinical laboratory studies are planned, performed, monitored, recorded, reported, and archived. As well as CGMP, which we'll jump into just a moment. So again, the IEC stands for the International Electrotechnical Commission, which in cooperation with ISO creates the specific system for global standardization. And ISO IEC 17025 is an international standard for testing and calibration laboratories. Further to that, it will likely very soon be a requirement across many DEA-approved laboratories that are offering compliance testing for hemp products. So, what is CGMP? CGMP stands for Current Good Manufacturing Practices. It's a system of regulations, codes, procedures, and guidelines to ensure that products are produced consistently according to the quality standards. And GMP was established in 1963. And the areas that come under GMP are much more than just laboratories. It's the facilities and buildings. It's the equipment for production, process control, packaging and labeling, laboratory controls, and returned and salvaged drug products as well. Again, it's the quality control laboratory that is one of the most important functions in the pharmaceutical production and control. But why GMP? So good manufacturing practices aims to reduce variation in a task or an outcome. It helps us to define our procedures and to ensure that those procedures are repeatable by trained staff. We need to ensure that each of those tasks happens the same way each time. We document those steps as they happen in a GMP lab. Similar to how you would go to many franchise restaurants across various jurisdictions and order a same meal, you're expecting to get the exact same product regardless of where you order that meal, provided you're visiting a restaurant with the same name. And GMP aims to produce that same level of reproducibility. Most importantly, it protects patients and consumers and allows for detailed record keeping to ensure that if anything does ever go awry, that we can help to conduct a recall, but most importantly, to avoid them altogether. The benefits of GMP certification include consistent product quality, efficiency in how those products are being manufactured. We can significantly reduce waste in the manufacturing process and improve and ensure traceability. It provides evidence for quality and safety and allows for the export to other markets. And that include, for example, the EU, where we'll have EU GMP, which will need to be respected. In addition to all these benefits mentioned above, it also signals to the clients that you are serious about quality and have safety and efficiency top of mind. So now, the 5 Ps of GMP. Not all these necessarily apply to analytical testing, and we're only surface scratching here, so we won't deep dive into every single one of these. But the 5 Ps include people, products, processes, procedure, and premises. Now, analytical testing labs can be incorporated inside a manufacturing plant, or they could be a third-party testing facility. And processes in a third-party testing facility that's not involved in manufacturing will be relatively simple as it pertains to analytical testing labs. So we won't deep dive into those too much. However, the people, the premises, and the procedures will be a focus. Looking at buildings and how they're designed, it is very important to ensure that what we're starting for GMP certification, that the building is met with sort of intention for GMP certification. It can be very difficult to GMP certify a building if it didn't have that intention in mind in its construction. So we normally would start with a proper floor plan design, including or up to and including finishes. So, for example, process flow, how products are moving in and out of the facility, how they're moving through the manufacturing stages from production to primary, secondary packaging, into storage, and then out of shipping and receiving again. How people will flow through the facility as they come in, where they enter, where they will store their outerwear, boots and jackets, how they will gown, where they will gown, and what level of gowning will be required based on the level of risk for contamination of the product in each room. Lighting, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, so anything from airflow to temperature to humidity control is a very important factor in GMP facility design. Plumbing, and that can include water quality, where it's coming from, how it's tested, sewage and refuse, cleaning and washing facilities, sanitation and sanitation protocols will be very important, and most importantly, the maintenance of all these systems, equipment, and training records. Moving to the 10 principles of GMP. It It is very important to design the equipment and build the laboratory effectively. So having an understanding of what the goals for the lab are. Are we starting in a small 1,000 square foot lab, or are we trying to build something that could be a space in which the lab can expand and function, and having the ability to add or remove rooms or change the site perimeter will be very important. Once that's done and we have a sense of what our perimeter is going to look like, we need to select the instruments that will be able to conduct the test that we want in a way that we'll be able to prove that the results we have are a good result. And that will include the validation of systems, including the equipment and processes. We'll then need to move to write detailed operating procedures that define those standards and follow those approved operating procedures throughout processes. Document all the work for compliance and traceability. Monitor the lab equipment regularly with scheduled routine maintenance. Everything even down to the top loading or analytical balance will be in spec for only a certain amount of time before it has to be brought back and validated again, brought back out of spec. And after a time limit passes, you're unable to use that particular piece of equipment and to be able to produce a result that is in specification. So respect of those routine maintenance schedules is extremely important when working in a quality and GMP lab. We need to ensure that employees are trained and retrained as procedures can be adjusted or changed. We need to make sure that we have the right employees, the right number of employees, and enough employees to be able to carry out the functions. In addition to that, we need to make sure that those employees have the right level of competency and training, education, before coming into those roles as well. We need to implement scrupulous sanitation protocols and ensure that those are followed. Quality control in packaging, labeling, storing, and destruction, ensuring that destruction records are well maintained. And that audits are planned, periodic, and they must be adhered to, and that include, for example, both internal and external audits. So the GMP certification pathway includes a commitment for management. It's very, very important that management is on board, they understand the scope, the cost, and the pathway towards moving to GMP certification. It's not something that one can just decide to do overnight without having a great understanding of what the scope of work is. It's important to make a registrar selection, the election of a steering group to help with implementing changes and corrective actions for the GMP certification process. And at that point, we'd want to start the internal audit cycle. From there, we draft the quality manual and document all procedures as they're occurring inside the lab. We complete an internal audit cycle and then have the registrar quality manual overview. From there, the registrar can make management reviews, have a pre-assessment audit, the registration audit, and then 12, we achieve certification and then continue to work to maintain that certification thereafter. Equipment and method validation are extremely important for setting up a GMP lab for cannabis, hemp, food, and pharma. For qualification, before starting the process validation activities, appropriate qualification of critical equipment and ancillary systems should be completed. Qualification is usually carried out by conducting the following activities, individually or combined. Design qualification, DQ. Documented verification that the proposed design of the facilities, equipment, or systems is suitable for the intended purpose. IQ, or installation qualification. Documented verification that the equipment or systems as installed or modified comply with the approved design, the manufacturer's recommendation, and/or user requirements. Operational qualification, OQ. Documented verification that the equipment or systems as installed or modified perform as intended throughout the anticipated operating ranges. And performance qualification, PQ. Documented verification that the equipment and ancillary systems as connected together can perform effectively and reproducibly based on the approved process method and specifications. Now the goal here is to produce certificates of analysis for these products, raw materials, and anything else that may be required that can be part of the production cycle. These should be issued for each batch of intermediate or API on request, and the information on the name of the intermediate or API, including where appropriate, its grade, the batch number, the date of release should be provided on the certificate of analysis. For intermediates or APIs with an expiry date, the expiry date should be provided on the label and the certificate of analysis. For intermediates or APIs with a retest date, the retest date should be indicated on the label and/or the certificate of analysis. The certificate should list each test performed in accordance with compendial or customer requirements, including the acceptance limits and the numerical result obtained. The tests, of course, are numerical. Certificates should be dated and signed by the authorized personnel of the quality units and should show the name, address, and telephone number of the original manufacturer, where the analysis has been carried out by a repacker or reprocessor. The certificate analysis should show the name, address, and/or the reprocessor and the telephone number of the repacker and processor and a reference to the name of the original manufacturer. If new certificates are issued by or on behalf of repackers or processors, agents or brokers, these certificates should show the name, address, telephone number of the laboratory that performed the analysis. They should also contain a reference to the name and address of the original manufacturer and to the original batch certificate, a copy of which should be attached with the telephone number of the repacker and processor and a reference to the name of the original manufacturer. GMP does not necessarily start at all phases for cannabis and hemp. The cultivation and production part is generally occurring under what we call good agricultural collection practices. We have a rule in cannabis GMP in which we mention that post-harvest activities up to including drying will fall under GACP, and after the drying step occurs, the products then become GMP. That is to say, products will enter a specific room for drying as one set of regulations and leave having to follow another. Now, for the analysis of chemical composition, there are a number of inputs that are very important to have a strong understanding of. And when setting up an analytical lab, it'll be important to understand what it is we're actually looking to assist with the testing for. And analytical testing may be required for cultivators for soil, nutrients, and even water sources. But other important factors that affect quality will include temperature, humidity, and ventilation, photo period, the photo spectrum of the lights, and gas exposure such as CO2 for the plants as well. Now, cannabis contains over 130 cannabinoids, but mostly there are 12 cannabinoids that we're most strongly interested in. CBD or cannabidiol is shown here with its respective acid at the R group. Delta-9 THC and THCA is shown here. CBN or cannabinol, THCV, CBC, and CBG are also other commonly tested for cannabinoids. Also, with what's happening in the US with hemp-derived cannabinoids such as delta-8 THC, it's very important to be able to detect the amounts of delta-8 THC and delta-8 THCA in those samples as well. For cannabinoid profile testing, normally an HPLC is used, and because we're doing a Perkin-Elmer session today, I've decided to show the Perkin-Elmer instrument. And again, those cannabinoids are listed here: THCV, THC, delta-8 THC, THCA, and where not indicated being delta-8, it's assumed it's delta-9, CBD, CBDA, CBDV, CBN, CBG, CBGA, and CBC. For the cannabis terpene profile testing, terpenes again are chemicals that are both naturally occurring and can be synthetic as well, but they are found within the cannabis plant and are thought to contribute to the entourage effect. And as additional information, specifically within Canada, a lot of terpene information from analytical testing is included as part of that labeling information. For terpene profile testing, normally GCMS with headspace analysis is used for these kinds of tests. Residual solvents for cannabis extracts is very important when testing those extracts and those oils, as solvents are often used to help facilitate that extraction in the case of non-physical extraction. Many common laboratory solvents are listed here, and there is also a list of allowable limits. Some solvents with no limits include, and I say solvents in brackets, carbon dioxide, as in supercritical carbon dioxide extraction, water, as in ice water extraction, and nitrogen, as liquid nitrogen extraction. Testing for mycotoxins and pesticides, and here we have some common mycotoxins that are listed. The list of pesticides will vary jurisdiction to jurisdiction and are much longer than many of the lists of mycotoxins, and for that, an LC-MS would be required. For heavy metal testing, the most important metals for testing are, again, the CLAM group, so cadmium, lead, arsenic, and mercury. Heavy metals are representative substances that not only exist in nature, but are introduced into ecosystems through human activities in their development and normal growth. However, those heavy metals in CLAM, such as lead, cadmium, arsenic, and mercury, and sometimes tin, are highly toxic when consumed in excess, and as such are dangerous and not essential for metabolism, so their testing is required. Cannabis and hemp have this unique characteristic about them that if any kinds of heavy metals are present in the soil, they can absorb these heavy metals, and those metals can be found in the stalk, stem, and flowers of those plants. For this testing, ICP-MS, or an inductively coupled plasma mass spectroscopy, can be performed, and these instruments are capable of detecting heavy metals at low concentrations, even as low as 1 parts per quadrillion. Stability testing. Stability testing is very important when developing new and unique products to get a sense of their shelf life and their expiry date. An examination of a substance's product or a product over a specified period of time to examine the effects of different storage conditions on the characteristics of the substance or product. That can include temperature, humidity, light, and this can also change depending on the primary packaging of a product. In early stages, it is done for stress and accelerated testing to give a sense of potential expirations, and accelerated and real-time tests are very common for finished products in their primary packaging. And these again help to determine shelf life, the shelf life period for the product, as well as the expiry date. All right, so some other considerations worth mentioning. So the U.S. federal regulations with the 2018 Farm Bill, we've defined hemp under the U.S. federal legislation as cannabis sativa, a plant containing no more than 0.3% on a dry weight basis, so weight for weight, in the flowering heads. Typically, concentrations of THC in both hemp and regular cannabis will be extremely low in the stalks, stems, and leaves. So it's normally upon the flowering stage that the compliance testing is most crucial. And it's a key requirement for hemp producers to have that compliance testing to be able to transform those products further downstream. Important to consider is the licensed acres for hemp by state. And here we have a map of the United States showing that we have an extremely large number of acres of hemp in the Northeast states. So again, having a strong understanding of where your clients will be located is very important. But unfortunately, it can be a little bit more complicated than just understanding where folks are located before setting up your analytical testing lab. Some of the state-specific information that would be part of the screening criteria include understanding the regulatory body that controls the compliance testing regulations for cannabis and hemp in each state. And in each state, there'll be shipping requirements for compliance testing. There are laboratory requirements. Important to know the acres of hemp grown in open areas and how much of that is actually harvested. So the state with the highest number of acres of hemp cultivated doesn't necessarily mean that all that hemp becomes harvested later on. It's important to understand where the largest numbers of licensed producers are located. That can be, for example, the growers and the processors and the manufacturers, what the market cap is for compliance testing for hemp biomass, as well as the number of DEA-approved labs in each state are important considerations. Now, some of the specific challenges of analytical testing in the U.S. The regulations vary across each state, and a lot of these considerations include, for example, shipping across state lines, whether that's raw or the finished products. The requirements for testing, as well as the permissible limits for pesticides, metals, and so on. So it'll be very important to have a strong understanding of what specifically is required for each state, and when setting up an analytical testing lab, if it would even be possible to move sampled product to the laboratory if it was out of state. Here is a map of the U.S. showing out-of-state compliance testing. and where it's permissible. So all the states here shown in green allow for out-of-state compliance testing for hemp products. The ones shown here in yellow do have some limits, which are important to be aware of, and states such as Arizona do not allow out-of-state compliance testing. The reason for this is prior to compliance testing occurring, hemp can be considered as cannabis until it is shown to have less than 0.3% THC in the flowering heads. In addition to that, there are many states with established testing requirements, such as Alaska, California, Colorado. States with specific potency testing requirements only, Georgia, Idaho, Michigan, and states that do not require testing. As an analytical testing lab, it will be more advantageous to set up where the regulatory requirements are more strict for testing. Some specific examples include California, where the regulatory body is the California Department of Food and Agriculture, the CDFA, the Market Enforcement Branch, and the California Department of Public Health. The enabling regulations, so Assembly Bill number 45, Chapter 576 under the Industrial Hemp Products, compliance testing is permitted out of state, laboratory must be registered with the department, and hemp testing requirements for industrial hemp, raw must be tested in its final form to be used as an ingredient prior to being incorporated into a product. Scope of testing includes THC, CBD, heavy metals, microbials, mycotoxins, moisture content, pesticides, and residual solvents. And the number of licensed producers in this state are 209. For Colorado, we have the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, the CDPHE. The enabling regulations are the Colorado Wholesale Food, Industrial Hemp, and Shellfish Regulations 6 CCR 1010-21. Compliance testing is permitted out of state, but the laboratory must be registered as a hemp testing laboratory, an HTL, with the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. Hemp testing requirements would include for foods, food additives, dietary supplements, cosmetics containing hemp, must test for potency and contaminant levels. And the scope of testing includes THC and other cannabinoids for potency, residual solvents, microbials, mycotoxins, pesticides, heavy metals, and moisture content, and there are 325 licensed producers in the state. Finally, to contrast with Florida, where we have the regulatory bodies, the Hemp Products for Ingestion Division of Food Safety, the Hemp Products Topicals, Department of Business and Professional Regulation, and the enabling regulations are 5K-4.034 Food Safety Rule. Shipping for compliance testing is permitted, and testing must be performed by a designated independent accredited laboratory. Hemp testing requirements: hemp extracts must be tested for potency and contaminants. The scope of testing is cannabinoid limits, pesticide limits, residual solvent limits for ingestion or inhalation, metal limits, mycotoxins. And there are 802 licensed producers in the state of Florida. So some best practices when considering shipping to these states that do allow out-of-state testing. There's no regulatory framework for shipping, but we do have some recommendations on what this should look like. The USDA recommends some best practices as well, which we've continued to recommend, and that's a copy of the license to grow hemp for the cultivator. Having that handy when crossing state lines would be very important. Statement to law enforcement that says something to the effect that this is a hemp sample grown at a licensed facility being transported to a testing laboratory for compliance reasons, and documentation showing the chain of custody from the cultivator down to the sampler for the analytical testing lab. We're shipping using a service we recommend the United States Postal Service, as they have a framework to transport hemp without actually taking ownership, whereas UPS and FedEx will take ownership of the package. And in addition to that, they can also guarantee delivery within 48 hours, but make sure that you're checking with local state regulations as to any limits that may occur for the time of testing, from the time of sampling to the time that testing can actually be completed. Now, coming soon is the Federal Laboratory Approval Program. This is going to be administered by the Laboratory Approval Service under the Agricultural Marketing Services of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. These labs must be DEA registered, and we're expecting this to come into force by the end of 2022. Scope of testing must clearly be defined, and an adherence to ISO 17025 is going to be strongly encouraged. As part of this federal approval program, under records, we'll need a copy of Certificate of Accreditation and Scope from an accreditation body recognized by the International Laboratory Accreditation Cooperation. test method validation and verification studies, equipment calibration or calibration verification certificates and records, test reports of the COAs, and supporting analytical data, staff training records and authorizations, internal audit reports, and associated corrective actions, management review report and associated status of action items, proficiency test results and associated corrective actions and correlations if relevant, test method control charts, and equipment inventory. Policies and procedures must include a master list of documents, includes forms, a quality manual, a conflict of interest statement and procedure, document control procedure, records control procedure, corrective action procedure, internal audit procedure, management review procedure, training, equipment handling, calibration verification schedule and procedures, method validation and verification procedures, test method procedures including method quality controls and how to handle non-conforming quality controls, and calculated measurement of uncertainty, proficiency testing procedures, control charting procedure, and test report procedure. Now, the plan to succeed. Plan. It's important when looking for setting up a analytical testing lab that would be GMP compliant or GMP certified for both cannabis and hemp that you start early. And it's okay not to know a lot at the beginning, but establish a baseline, identify your priorities, and set those goals. Execute, do and check, action to achieve goals, implement changes to processes, and reset and repeat. It's important to audit often, so act, evaluate, implement lessons learned and reevaluate, and leverage third-party certifications where possible. Monitor, measure, improve, document your results, find and fix as part of verify. If you have any questions about any content here or about any licensing, operations, or compliance questions, feel free to get in contact with us. Our email address is info@CannDelta.com. Our toll-free number is listed here, or you can reach us at CannDelta.com on the web. Appreciate the time.
All right, thanks everyone for joining today's call. My name is Christine Saffron and I will be facilitating today's questions. So right now we are going to take the next couple of minutes for the Q&A with our presenters. If we do not get to your question, we will follow up with everyone afterwards. As a reminder, anyone who registered will get a copy of the recorded presentation after today's call. And with that, thank you, and let's get the questions started. Okay. So I'm going to just go through what we have here. Okay, question 1. Can I use the one kit on my Agilent mass spec? I think this question might be for Toby.
Thanks, Christine. Short answer is yes. As I mentioned earlier, the reagents are all ISO 17034 certified and instrument agnostic. So double check the pesticide and mycotoxin regulatory requirements, and if they are within the 77 in the kit, you are fully able to use them on any mass spec platform. We also provide additional details such as the MRMs when you purchase the internal standard kit. That will expedite your method development.
Okay. All right, let's take a look at question 2. Let's see, this is from John. John, can I integrate microbial testing workflow into Simplicity Lab software?
Yes, that's a great question. I didn't speak to it in detail earlier. We recognize that the majority of cannabis and hemp regulatory requirements include microbial testing. And there are a number of approaches, whether it be a more traditional plating technique or qPCR. Where there is a need to move data or integrate to a qPCR instrument, the Simplicity Lab software can accommodate that. So we can move that data across the bench and then through the informatics framework so you can meet your local, state, or country compliance requirements. I'd be happy to take that conversation offline if you have more questions.
Great, great. All right, let's take a look. Question, wow, lot of questions for Toby today. Will the Janus prepare samples for any other assays?
Good question. So we decided to focus on one of the more challenging assays we've seen in the cannabis and hemp industry, and that's the pesticide and mycotoxin assay, due to the larger, longer lists and the low level of detection requirements. Now that we've done that, we are also automating the other workflows, and we're starting with the potency workflow. So later this summer, there will be a fully automated sample preparation protocol for the 16 cannabinoids in cannabis and hemp, which you can automate on that same Janus platform with very little hardware changes. In addition, there is a similar Janus platform on a smaller scale for the microbial automation needs. So if you need to automate qPCR for 96 or 384 well plate, we have an option for that as well. And again, both can be integrated into the Simplicity Lab software framework as needed.
Great. Okay, question 4. This is from Julia. Can you automate the Colorado hemp pesticide method?
Yes. As some may know, this is a relatively new hemp pesticide method that Colorado published and requires now. That method is being completed on the QSite LCM-SMS, and the automation protocol is in hand as well. So for large volumes of hemp samples that need to be screened and quantified for that pesticide test, you can now tackle that with this technology.
Next question. Would ICP-MS, along with Titan sample preparation system for cannabinoid flower analysis, would allow removal of the excess heavy metal levels from the samples using HPLC? Apologies.
I mean, I actually don't know what that question's trying to get at, what they're trying to do, but no. I mean, a Titan preparation system digests sample completely, so everything that was in the sample is now in solution for subsequent analysis by ICP. So you can't really extract them using HPLC, you know.
Okay, this question is for F-Team. How much of a problem are heavy metals in cannabis? How prevalent?
Anyway, I mean, there are hits. How prevalent? I mean, depends what you're growing it in, what type of medium.
I can add to that, Aaron. Yes, it does occur. You can look at some of the public records, such as the ones reported out by the Bureau of Cannabis Control and the Department of Cannabis Control in California. You see that heavy metal failures are one of the most common hits. We don't have the visibility to what kind of heavy metal, but they are failing one of the big 4 Aaron spoke about earlier.
Yeah, I mean, cannabis.
Maybe if I could, oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. Yep.
I was just going to say that in addition to the biomass, the consideration of the cannabis product that's also being sold is very important. We work a lot with Canadian producers out here. Pre-rolls, depending on the method of testing, sometimes heavy metals can be detected in the filter papers or the rolling papers themselves. So strong consideration there.
Oh, totally agree. I completely agree. We're seeing hits, especially lead in a lot of materials as well. So it can pop up at the levels we're working at.
All right, a couple more questions. Let's see. This question is from Ramana Ryan. where do you find the information on the limits of heavy metals for hemp and cannabis that is mandated by the government for different U.S. states?
Toby or Lucas probably have a better idea. I mean, I just find them on their various
Lucas,
state
why don't
websites.
you tackle that one first? I'm happy to add if I can.
Yeah, that's a nice lob I can take. Depending on who the regulator is for that state for hemp, whether it's the DEA or a state regulator, the part of the website that speaks to hemp regulations will have that information there. It's going to vary state to state who the regulator is, again, and what those particular limits are.
Great. Okay. This question is from Aubrey. Is the GAP and CGMP related based on location or how far lab is removed from farming area?
Okay, great question. So, well, the nature of many kinds of cultivation is such that it's very difficult to GMP certify soil and growing spaces. So it's definitely a challenge that we see a lot in the Canadian industry, as well as outdoor cultivators as well for both hemp and cannabis across North America. So typically, we had mentioned it's a post-harvest activity that sort of represents the switch in the kinds of governing regulations there. Most notably, in many cases, especially EU GMP, it's typically the bringing the products into a drying room. It represents the switch from GACP, removing them as GMP. But yeah, it's a great question. Those things operate in complete opposite to one another in terms of sort of how they're set up to exist. So definitely a challenge working in facilities in which both of those activities are occurring, both the cultivation and post-harvest activities. So yeah, it's a great question.
Lucas? Okay, we are going to take one more question. Can you ship cannabis samples from the U.S. to Canada legally?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. From U.S. to Canada, in the event that there may be some hemp seeds, hemp starting material, there's certainly a framework there for that. That can be possible. Again, crossing state lines with any kind of cannabis product, or also crossing federal lines with cannabis product, and many kinds of hemp product in those cases is impossible. I would largely say, and that kind of flows both ways. We can't export from Canada into the U.S. So if you do have a business model that does revolve on that, it's probably not going to be very easy to be profitable, with the exception of any products that might be coming into Canada for either research or analytical testing would be permitted, provided that you could actually get the approvals to cross the state line on that. So largely, we see a lot of hemp.
Okay, so I think that concludes today's Cannabis and Hemp Series talks. Feel free to reach out to myself, the team, with questions. And that is it. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. Have a great week. And we will see you at the next Cannabis and Hemp Series talks. Have a great one, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks to Perkin and Elmer for hosting.
Thank you, everyone.
Appreciate it.
Thanks,
Thanks a lot.
Good afternoon, everyone.